Thanks, Bonnie. Yeah, my name's John Shearer, and I'm a mindfulness master and mentor for roses and the ocean. And I have lived experience of suicide, firstly, way back in 1987 when I was suicide myself. And, you know, hope really was the only thing that kept me alive back then. It's sort of become part of my story now. And also, more recently, in recent years, I've lost people very close to me, and also people, because I am a mental health professional, and I've lost clients as well. And it really impacted me big time, actually, at the time, because I thought, well, how can this happen to me? You know? Mm-hmm. So anyhow, that's just a little bit of who I am and a bit of my lived experience. Well, I really believe, well, I often say the biggest or best antidote for depression is finding your purpose. So that goes without saying. I'm sure when we have purpose, we have a reason to wake up in the morning. And quite often older people, they become lonely and almost forgotten about sometimes, and they don't have that sense of purpose. And, you know, I know that to be true just from friends of mine, actually. That's one of the main things. There's probably other factors as well. But certainly that's a big one. And also health. Health is certainly a factor, because as people become unwell, well, can I be quite frank? Actually, we treat our horses and dogs better than we do, you know, as human beings, kind of thing, and how they try really hard to keep us alive. So sometimes, you know, that's a factor with older people as well, you know, that they don't actually have the right to die. So sometimes I see suicide as a brave thing, a courageous thing. You know, I know we're really into suicide prevention, but there's the other side of that coin as well. Well, they probably wouldn't. But having said that, because I've come a long way since those days, like 1987 was, you know, 35 years ago or something. And I have a pretty strong sense of intuition these days. So if I was talking to someone with similar strong intuition, they could very well pick up on it. And also, if it was someone that knew me well, or a family member perhaps, they would be able to pick up on it. And my wife certainly would, you know, what's going on, John? You know, because maybe I wouldn't be being myself. And, you know, I still do have the odd day where I'll have a suicidal thought. It hasn't gone away totally. And I think if we're all honest, we all have times like that. You know, would I be better off dead? You have that thought without any intention to do anything. Yeah, it's a tough one, but there is certainly fishing questions you could possibly ask, you know, especially along the lines of spirituality, for example. And I really believe spirituality and culture I see is sadly missing in mental health services today. It's just not there. And when you're able to make connection with someone, you know, with there's a new term actually for psychosis or hearing voices, for example, a new expression, and you can Google it if you like, and that's spiritual emergency. And when you put a different perspective on people's experiences like that, you know, they're having a spiritual emergency. And I certainly had my spiritual emergencies. And then eventually in 1997, 10 years later, I emerged spiritually, and that changed my life. And I was able to get off medications and get out of the mental health system altogether. I was very lucky. And I did have a good mentor back then as well. Yeah. Well, clients come and see me often who have their free appointments with psychologists through the mental health system. And then always I do 90-minute sessions. And I do that because the first third of it, roughly, we get to know each other and exchange stories. And we all have a story. And typically someone comes to see me and I'll say to them, what about if we exchange stories? You want me to go first? So I share my story, and then, when we make ourselves vulnerable, then that gives other people permission to open up, to be vulnerable themselves. And they do. It never fails. And people open up, and then you go from there. So I really think that's a really important part of it, is sharing our story, making ourselves vulnerable, and that gives other people permission to open up and, share their story and be vulnerable. And it's amazing what can come out of that sometimes too. Yeah, well, I think a huge factor and something that's always worth talking about is fear. And once we start addressing fear, even a lot of people are scared of dying, for example, and me personally, of course, I see that as part of our journey, the end part, and I have no fear of that. And so, that's one way, is start talking about fear, because fear is the enemy, and it's not helpful in any way, and it doesn't matter how you look at it. And we certainly all have fears. It's just our natural state in a lot of instances. It's the way that we're kept safe, if you like, by having. There is healthy fears too, but I think if we can start talking about fear, and of course the opposing force, if you like, for that is love, So we can't really talk about one without the other. It's like the yin and yang. Yeah, I always use fear and love, or dark and light, because when I share my story, it always in part of that is me stepping from the dark into the light, because 15 years I was stuck in the mental health system, and it was like I had blinkers on. I couldn't really see what was going on, not until I got spiritual perspective, and that changed everything for me. And I was able to step from the dark into the light. And when we start talking about these things, it's amazing just how people open up. And because we can all come up with a story about the dark and the light, and asking questions. Do you think that it's compulsory to come through the dark night of the soul to be able to walk in the light? That's a question which encourages people to tell more of their story, and or stories around that. So really, it's all about listening, really, from my perspective, asking the right questions, getting people to think and open up, and then of course it's a matter of listening, and I mean listening without having any agenda or thinking about what to say next or anything, just being fully present, because we sense that it's important to be fully present when the other person's talking, and we sense when other people aren't fully present with us, and the same vice versa as well. Yeah, well, that's one of the big things, especially with old people, because we all know and we've all had experiences with old people, with granny or grandpa or whoever, and they just love reminiscing and talking and sharing stories of the past, because like I said before, they're often lonely. And yeah, I don't know what it is, and I'll probably be that way one day too, sharing stories of my past. I won't be any different, I don't think. But I think that's really important and probably the most helpful thing to do, and is listening mindfully, which is with full presence. Yeah.